Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, June the 16th, 2025. So things really are happening in the world. We've got the conflict between Iran and Israel. We've also had sort of riots in the US. What do they call it? No King's Day. We've had politicians being shot in, where was it, Minnesota. And so this is all connected with Mars square Uranus, and that this Mars square Uranus was exact over the weekend. And it's tempting to think that when you have an aspect like Mars square Uranus, you look to see when it is exact, and then after it's gone through exactitude, you're thinking, well, its impact is weakening. Well, the bad news is that Mars-Uranus square is not finished. In fact, I would argue that the Mars-Uranus square is actually going to be, at least in theory, more powerful on Monday, today, the 16th, than it was over the weekend. And the reason for this is that we have Mercury doing stuff. Mercury is actually on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. And so Mercury is making a semi-square to Uranus, it's making a semi-square to Mars. It's kind of bringing it all together. And Mercury is acting like a super detonator, a detonator for something that is already exploding. So, at least in theory, Monday does look a difficult day. Yeah, and of course today is Monday. And you could argue that the moon is also playing its role. We've got Moon square Uranus today. We've got Moon opposition Mars, Moon sesquiquadrate Mercury. So it is really an active time. And in this video, at least at the end of this video, I want to consider the role of Mercury and ask what does it mean for Mercury to be on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. But before I do all of that, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Monday, June 16th, 2025. And here is the chart for today, set for noon New York time. By the way, don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. And so here's the chart for noon today, and you can see that at noon the moon is making it's making an opposition to Mars, but it's in very late Aquarius. So the first part of the day is about moon being in Aquarius, moon being in a Saturn ruled sign, but it is opposition Mars, and so that moon Mars opposition is potentially quite fiery, and it also picks up true black moon Lilith. There is true black moon Lilith in Sagittarius. So Mars is applying to true black moon Lilith. Moon is bringing it all together. So you could say that there's a T-square involving Moon, Mars, and true black moon Lilith. And so the moon potentially causes quite a lot of damage in late Aquarius, and it also makes, when we get in fact you could say we've got a grand cross actually, because you've got true black moon Lilith at 1 degree Capricorn, square moon, square Mars, and then the moon is moving towards a square of Uranus. So that indicates that it's not going to be a particularly stable day. Now, you could say that is stating the obvious. You don't have to be an astrologer to say that, because of the conflict that's been going on over the weekend. And I said it's not just about Iran and Israel. There are loads of other places where there is conflict, and that includes the United States, the streets of Los Angeles, for example. And so we have that, and then we've got Mercury. Now, I'll be talking about Mercury in detail at the end of the video, but Mercury is at 14 Cancer at noon, and you can see that Mercury is making a semisquares. Mercury making it semisquare to Uranus, semisquare to Mars. So Mercury is the detonator. Mercury is really triggering the full impact of that the full impact of that Mars-Uranus square. So it could be a difficult, even dangerous day, but not necessarily for us as individuals. It's just more about what's happening on our planet. And the moon does eventually move into Pisces, changes sign. London time, I make it 9 minutes past 7 in the evening. So moon moving into Pisces, well, it could be a relief. We've got these planets in late fixed sign, and the moon getting out of fixed signs into Pisces might actually make things easier. And when the moon does move into Pisces, it does make a trine to Jupiter, so that's kind of a last aspect of the day. And that trine to Jupiter, which is probably going to be strongest if you're in the Americas, may give us some feeling that things are returning to normal. So as you can see, there's quite a lot going on today. And if we set the chart for Sydney, Australia, the moon is at 21 Aquarius at noon. So it doesn't go into Pisces at all today, and the moon, as the day progresses, will move towards that opposition of Mars square to Uranus. So the pressure is starting to build up as the day gets underway, and sort of the later in the day, probably all things being equal, the higher the pressure. And then there is the heliocentric view, and it's fairly similar to what we had over the weekend. We've still got this heliocentric T-square, Mars opposition Neptune, Jupiter on a T, Jupiter square Neptune, Jupiter square Mars. Okay, that Mars square Jupiter is no longer exact, but it's still very much making its influence felt. And we're seeing Mars square Jupiter, and I think this is a reminder that Mars square Jupiter can be quite a destructive energy, causing people to overdo it, countries to overdo it. Some of us might feel inclined to be aggressive, and of course we're seeing a lot of violence in the world, and much of that is to do with Mars square Jupiter. And additionally, we have got Earth square Saturn. There is the Earth at 25-26 Sagittarius, making that square to Saturn. Again, another aspect that is no longer exact, but it's close enough. It's within half a degree, about that. And so Earth square Saturn is a difficult energy, and we hit some roadblocks. We realize we can't do everything we want to do, and we might feel that we have to lash out with Earth square Saturn, especially as we've got Mars square Jupiter at the same time as Earth square Saturn. What do we do if things aren't working out? Do we just get on with it and carefully organize our life, or do we instead feel we have to take dramatic initiatives? And Mars square Jupiter could encourage us to do that, and could encourage us to take things too far. So that's the heliocentric picture, and now I'm going to look at things from a viewpoint of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Monday, June the 16th, 2025. Aries. Aries, you really feel that you're on the cusp of something, that something has to change, something must change, and you may feel that you're just not ready to completely commit yourself. But at the same time, you hate doing nothing. You would like something to happen. Anything. After all, when we looked at the heliocentric chart, we saw that Mars was square Jupiter. So Mars is your ruler, square Jupiter. You may find you just want to do something, anything. But such an approach may not always be wise. And if we look at what's actually going on today, astrologically, we do have a semi-square between Mercury and Mars. So Mercury semi-square Mars might incline you, Aries, to be quite impulsive, maybe on a verbal level. Your mind is running fast. Lots of things going through your mind, and you're not entirely relaxed. And of course, Mercury doesn't just make a semi-square to Mars; it also makes a square to Uranus, and it makes an opposition to Mars. So, Aries, you do perhaps feel that you are under pressure, and that you have to respond. Though, it's not all bad. Remember that Mars is moving on to the fixed star Regulus, very close to Regulus, and you're perhaps feeling Mars on Regulus over the weekend, but now, today and tomorrow, Tuesday, it will be exactly there. And this might be about connections, being able to link up with important people. So if there's someone important you want to get in touch with, now might be your chance. But don't forget your own importance. Regulus is quite a regal energy by definition, and so if you want to show how wonderful you are, then maybe you can get away with it. But of course, there's always a danger of arrogance, but that's not really a trap that you're going to fall in. I don't think Aries actually is an arrogant sign. I think that Aries is it's very spontaneous. Arrogance is just too limiting for the average Aries. They just want to do whatever they want to do. And with Mars on Regulus, there is no doubt that you can accomplish quite a lot. I mean, you can, provided you get it right, but you really have to get it right, because there are so many temptations to do the wrong thing, and it just might be best, however tense you feel, to just wait it out, to allow things to develop in their own way. And when Mars moves into Virgo, which is of course tomorrow, when Mars moves into Virgo, I think you're going to find that things are more straightforward. And also the moon is changing sign. Could be today, could be tomorrow, but certainly if you're in the UK, early this evening, the moon moves out of Aquarius into Pisces. If you're in the Americas, sort of around lunchtime, the moon changes sign. Of course, that depends when you have lunch, and if you have lunch. And so with the moon moving into Pisces, things might slow down, and you might lose some of that intensity, and you won't be quite so tense. And also there may be room for relaxation, and maybe Aries, that's what you really need, because there is just been so much going on. Sometimes you were able to take advantage of what was going on. Other times you might have been frankly overwhelmed by it all, and so perhaps with the moon in Pisces, you can just take a break and review the situation and decide what your next move is going to be. And your next move doesn't necessarily have to be immediate. You can wait a few days, perhaps, and that might be the best strategy. Taurus, it's a day that for many of us could be busy, and there are certainly some serious aspects going on. You have got Uranus still moving through your sign, and of course next month Uranus moves into Gemini, finally leaves Taurus. I think it's on July the 7th, And the moon is making a square to Uranus. The moon is also making an opposition to Mars. So we have a T square, and it's a T square that is relevant for the average Taurean. So do think about what that Uranus in Taurus is all about. It's been there for around 7 years, and what have you been trying to express? Uranus is an energy that is fairly individualistic, and it can be quite revolutionary as well. And you are trying to define and assert your individuality, and really work out what makes you special and why you are different, and also why you want to change things. Is there a reason? Sometimes people want to just change things, just for that, just because. And this Uranus is made relevant because of this opposition aspect between the moon and Mars. And the moon and Mars, it's a fixed opposition. So Taurus is a fixed sign, and so with moon in Aquarius opposition Mars in Leo, you want to get noticed, and you want to make an impression, and you might actually be quite ambitious in your own way, and you want things to happen your way, according to your vision. But there's pressure and there's opposition, and that opposition comes from Mars. Mars may represent another person. It could represent something going on at home, in your family, something holding you up, something that could be just blocking progress, or you having to deal with a pressure that you don't want to do. And you might be aware of obligations, but at the same time you don't want to carry these obligations out. I mean, why should you? You are an individual, and perhaps what you need to do today is be an individual. Tell everyone that you do things differently and that you have a particular approach. But is there really any need to have a big fight about it? And Uranus can be an individual, can be a revolutionary, without anyone getting upset or hurt. And it may just be about you just being yourself and being uncompromising in this attitude, but also just ignoring opposition. And if you kind of feel that there is an obligation elsewhere, maybe you can just maybe you can just pretend the obligation doesn't exist and just do what you like, within reason. And that might seem selfish. That could be quite risky, doing what you like. But if you can do what you like without having to get involved in a conflict, then surely that would be great. And it is also a time, Taurus, when you can make things happen. You really can make things happen. So you should not be feeling powerless today. You can always step in and sort of utilize the explosive force of the cosmos. I mean, we are living in explosive times, and maybe you can channel this explosiveness so that you can actually create a world that you are comfortable with, one step at a time. And again, I must emphasize, no one needs to get hurt or upset. It's unnecessary. And if you are confident in your individuality, then you're going to be fine. And also, Taurus, don't forget that Venus is moving through your sign. Venus is a harmonious influence, and with Venus moving through your sign, you can come over as a pleasant person, and you can really smooth things over, and people will understand you. And if you have to explain yourself, then you can, but just keep going in terms of what you believe in. It's not about compromise. But Venus in Taurus can perhaps appear to be reasonable, And that's maybe what you can do. You appear to be reasonable, but deep down you're being completely unreasonable, and just no one ever knows about it. Gemini. Gemini, there is actually quite a lot of focus on Mercury, which is your ruler. And in a way, this video is about Mercury, and the fact that Mercury is on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. So with Mercury on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, you have got lots to say, got lots to do, lots to think about, and I'm afraid that you may not be especially relaxed. Relaxation might be, hard to find. There's always something that's worrying you, bothering you, and once you start thinking about something, well, you can't stop. And I'm a Gemini, as you know, got my sun in Gemini, and I'm actually feeling like that a bit at the moment. I am not relaxed right now, and my mind is thinking really at a very high speed, not necessarily in a constructive way. I don't know whether you can tell. Maybe you can tell from just watching me in this video. So you may be feeling something of what I'm experiencing, and part of it is because of Mercury. I mean, I'm making this recording on Sunday, by the way. So Mercury has not actually made that full aspect between Saturn and Uranus, between Mars and Uranus yet. But by Monday, I don't know what my state of mind will be like by Monday. But on Monday, Mercury will be exactly there on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, and so try not to take things too seriously. Try not to think about things too much, but at the same time, you can have an impact, and there could be something about you that is, that is quite explosive. We do live in explosive times, and especially if you're a Gemini, and so do think through, what you're saying and what you're doing. It could have consequences, and sometimes it's best to do nothing, even if you want to do everything. With this Mercury on the Mars, Mercury, making a semi-square to Mars, semi-square to Uranus, and it can be accident prone. I mean, no doubt about that. I mean, Mars and Uranus as a pair are problematic. They can encourage us to get involved in things which very quickly get out of control, and so be careful and don't do anything dangerous, and think through what could go wrong. That's always a good question to have with Mercury aspecting Mars and Uranus, and if you can imagine what could go wrong, that might allow you to stay out of trouble. Now, on the plus side, there's no doubt that it is a dynamic day. You can have an impact. You're not the kind of person who is just going to be ignored. And this could cover many different areas. It may actually have a relationship to money. So if you get involved with money, something that has financial consequences, things could move quickly. And actually, you may really want to tell people what's on your mind financially. And I talked about one's mind zooming around, and the question is, what are you thinking about? You could find yourself thinking about money. So if you start thinking about money, you have one thought about money, and then you're trying to think it through, and then that leads to another thought and another thought and another thought, and it just goes round and round and round. And if you start talking about money, the conversation may move into areas that you hadn't anticipated, and there could be anger. It could be you getting angry about money, might be other people, and so money needs to be treated with care, and also try not to be too impulsive. Sometimes one attempts to resolve an issue by spending money, and that is probably not such a good idea. And On a different note, the moon is in late Aquarius, but it's moving into Pisces. And certainly if you're in the Americas, by lunchtime, the moon will be in lunchtime, early afternoon, the moon will be in Pisces. And I think that when the moon does move into Pisces, things will get better. I think you'll feel sort of more relaxed and more able to just think about one thing and not to be so distracted. Now, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon won't go into Pisces until tomorrow, but don't worry, it'll get there in the end. And with moon in Pisces, it does actually make a trine to Jupiter. So when the moon moves into Pisces, it's not just that you feel better, you may be more capable, and you're going to be able to start thinking straight. And that may apply to money as well. So if you're concerned about money or some other thing that's bothering you, sit with it perhaps rather than take action. When you start worrying about something, you feel you want to resolve a matter immediately, and you do something, and you could actually be making things worse, and perhaps you should just allow things to settle. And when the moon does move into Pisces, when the moon makes a trine to Jupiter, you should actually find that really things start getting much easier, and easier as well as perhaps even a bit luckier. Moon trine Jupiter can be a lucky aspect, and if you're working or you're having to engage with other people, you're going to be easier to deal with, and you may come over as sort of being more positive, more optimistic, and you'll have a sense of what can work, what can't work, and your enthusiasm will certainly be noticed, but you have to wait that out. It just may take time for you to get into the swing of things, and that relates to the moon moving from Aquarius into Pisces. So if the day starts off being difficult, don't worry, because things will get better. Cancer, things may be complicated, but you certainly shouldn't take it personally. It is a really hectic time for many of us. There are all sorts of things going on, and I talked about Mars square Uranus, but it's the moon also gets involved with it as well. We have got moon square Uranus, we've got moon opposition Mars, and these aspects might have an impact on you. You may find it difficult to relax. A lot of people are going to find it difficult to relax, and perhaps it's a case of, because other people are feeling tense, you start feeling tense yourself, and this tension is almost infectious, and it can be spread in many ways, through the internet, through the phone, through the spoken word, through the written word. There are all sorts of ways in which this tension can be transmitted, and so there might be an argument under those circumstances for sort of isolating yourself. Do you really want to get involved in all of this? And maybe you should really try to focus on the positives. Now, I've talked about the moon making difficult aspects, the moon making a square to Uranus, moon making an opposition to Mars, but the moon does actually make a trine to the sun, and I haven't talked about that so far. And moon trine sun, moon in Aquarius trine the sun in Gemini, and that could be quite a reassuring influence. And it may be a question of you finding a way to emphasize the moon trine sun and sort of de-emphasize, for example, the moon square Uranus. And so what you can do is put yourself in a position where you can take advantage of it. And this moon trine sun for you is quite introspective. It doesn't need anyone's help, and it's about you being relaxed in your own way, at your own pace, and just not having to worry about outside disturbances. And you can do it, especially the sun. The sun is in Gemini. The sun is getting ready to move into Cancer, in 4 or 5 days time, end of a week, sun moves into Cancer. And then you'll be ready for new challenges, and I think you're going to be, all things being equal, more of an extrovert. But while the moon is in Gemini, while the sun is in Gemini, while the moon in Aquarius is making that trine to Gemini, take advantage of some of the advantages of the sun being in Gemini for a Cancerian. And those advantages are about doing things your own way, not feeling you have to be open. And it's not a time for revealing your secrets or for discussing things too deeply with other people. They might not understand, or there's even the possibility that confidences get betrayed. But yeah, it's absolutely unnecessary to be too open. Openness is not always a good thing. Transparency is not always a good thing. I know everyone thinks transparency is great, but sometimes, transparency can actually weaken you. And so, do think about that. And perhaps you should withdraw. And certainly, you shouldn't do anything that is dangerous, that carries a risk. I mean, Moon, after all, is opposition Mars, and ideally, money should be avoided. The whole topic of money should be avoided, because it could cause a lot of stress, and it may be difficult to find a resolution short term. Now, at some stage in the day, it could be tomorrow, the moon does change sign. It moves out of Aquarius and into Pisces. And the moon moving into Pisces is without doubt, Cancer, a good thing. The moon moves into a water sign, and it makes a trine to Jupiter. And that moon trine Jupiter is, the last aspect of the day, I think, and it depends on your time zone. But that's where the day is heading. Of course, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, then the moon trine Jupiter will be tomorrow. But still, the moon will be applying to that trine of Jupiter. And for you, it is a great aspect, and it is a reminder that Jupiter has changed signs. That Jupiter's no longer in Gemini. It's in Cancer. It's in your sign. It's exalted. Moon is trining Jupiter. So that might mean that there's just a moment where the day changes. It feels as if it's not satisfactory unless you are able to be very, very relaxed and calm. Maybe that's what you can do. Maybe you can just withdraw from all the chaos. But there does come a moment when things change. And with the moon moving into Pisces, making a trine to Uranus, things just suddenly get a lot easier. And you may just feel that some of your tension, or perhaps all of your tension, just drops away, and you start to feel free, and you become aware of what is possible, and you may actually start to count your blessings, and you may realize that actually your position isn't too bad. In fact, it might actually be very fortunate. Leo, it is a hectic day for everyone, Leos included, but I don't think that you are necessarily completely in the middle of things. I don't think that you have to be overly worried about what is happening. And additionally, Leo, you are in control. Sometimes you might not feel in control, but if you want to assert yourself, I think that you certainly can. And people will listen to you if you feel you need to be listened to. And you are in a position where if need be, you can create change. And the main aspect today, or should we say the main set of aspects probably is a T-square, and this T-square could have quite an impact, because we've got the moon in Aquarius in your opposite sign, making an opposition to Mars in Leo. Of course, Mars is just about to leave your sign and move into Virgo, and then the moon and Mars are both making a square to Uranus. And because of this T-square, you may feel that you have to be noticed, you have to be seen and heard, because you have got something that you really have, you've got something to offer, and you're sure of this, and you do want attention. And how do you manage it? Now, it's possible that you have to take into consideration other people. You may not want to take into consideration other people, but they need to be listened to, and they need to be heard, and you mustn't be too tough with anyone. I mean, you can certainly look after yourself at the moment, and you can hold to what you think is important, and you can be quite dramatic about it if you want. But what about the other person? How do other people respond to this? And so show some sympathy. You don't have to show a lot of sympathy. You don't have to, go out of your way to compromise. But try to understand what other people are thinking and feeling. I mean, if necessary, you can just sort of roll over them. You can sort of bulldoze them out of the way. Yeah, that is an option. But I don't think, Leo, that's necessarily, the right approach. And with this T-square, there's two planets involved in this T-square are, of course, Mars and Uranus. And Mars is still going through your sign. And you could say that Mars in very late Leo is quite strong, and it's conjunct Regulus. And yeah, it's square Uranus. And this is a time, yes, Leo, when you can get attention. You can get a lot of attention if that's what you want. But again, you have to think about the impact you're having and how you are perceived. People do have an impression of you, and your words and your actions are going to help form this impression. So perhaps there is a reputational issue here. You want to have a good reputation. You want to have people having good thoughts about you, and that does mean that you have to behave. And I really do think you can behave. Because, with the moon moving through Aquarius, your opposite sign, you have the capacity to be sympathetic and to understand things from another person's perspective. So that is the broad picture today. You are part of what is going on in the world. We're all part of what's going on in the world, and it is a tense time for many people, for many countries, for many groups of people, and you can feel it. And I think that you are picking up on this tension in quite a big way, but you are able to utilize it. And if you get it right, if you're assertive but also sympathetic, then I think in the end you'll get what you want, but no one has to be upset in the process, because you can just show enough sympathy. You don't have to be super compassionate. It's not like that. You don't have to go out of your way to look after someone's needs and interests. You don't have to do that, but just a bit of sympathy can go a long way. Virgo, there is a lot of emphasis right now on Mercury, and Mercury is your ruler. And so Mercury at the moment is making semisquares to Mars and Uranus. In fact, it's on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. So Mercury completely picks up on the Mars-Uranus square. And this Mars-Uranus square has just been dominating what's been going on in the world. We live in Mars-Uranus times, and this weekend this weekend we're just coming out of, has been quite tempestuous. It's not just because of what's going on between Israel and Iran. There have been politicians getting killed. We've got riots in Los Angeles. Of course, the war in Ukraine is grinding on, and yeah, you're picking up on it all because Mercury is on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, and it's aspecting both Mars and Uranus. So, Virgo, it's important that you are able to keep some distance, because you don't want to be completely dominated by collective energies. Like, for example, this Mars square Uranus, you need some distance, and it doesn't have to be huge amounts of distance, but you need to have your space. And for a Virgo, that's always important. Virgos are sensitive, and they're sensitive to their environment, and they're sensitive to other people, and so do look after yourself, and don't get too stressed out. I mean, I'm telling out to everyone, but Virgos can be quite stressed out. They can take things very seriously. They can get involved in lots of different things, and their mind can go in different directions. And yeah, it could all be rather exhausting. And with this Mars-Uranus, Virgo, it's not a time to be doing anything that is wildly different, that breaks your routine. You might be tempted to go out on a limb, to do something you've never done before, perhaps get involved in something that has an element of risk. Now, that risk has many dimensions. That risk needn't necessarily just be about physical risk. It could be the risk of embarrassment or the risk of falling out with someone, but it's probably not a day for taking risks unless you have really thought things through and you absolutely know what you're doing. So if you know what you're doing, okay, maybe might be a time to do something unusual. But even then, you have to always consider what is the worst case scenario. I mean, Virgos are quite good at thinking about the worst case scenario. So do try to think things through, and do try to sort of model various outcomes in your mind, and that certainly would be useful. And we do have to look at Mercury aspecting Mars-Uranus in a positive sense. It's not just a negative energy. It can allow you to really be in the center of things, and you can be the cause of great disruption, again, if you want to be. And people will have to listen to you, and the things you say could be disruptive. And it's possible that disruption can be handled correctly. So through your words, through the drama of your words, through the explosiveness of your words, you can get people to listen. And when people listen to you, they may actually decide that you've not just got something useful to say, but actually they want to follow your lead. And that is a note for the future, by the way, because Uranus is about to move into Gemini. Okay, Uranus doesn't move into Gemini until July the 7th, I don't think, but it does get there in the end. And Uranus moving into Gemini, I think, could be really good for many Virgos. It might be a period of quite a few years when you can really establish your individuality and really make yourself into someone who is special, who's got something unique to offer, and who also can be very, very dramatic and even revolutionary. So start thinking about what it means for Uranus to move into Gemini, because I think that it could work in your favor. I mean, it could be quite a disruptive influence, but of course I will be talking about Uranus going into Gemini in detail in in a few weeks' time, or closer to the moment. So, Virgo, today may not actually be about you as an individual having to deal with things that just relate to you. Instead, you're dealing with a lot of energy taking place at a collective level that we're all having to deal with, regardless of one sign. But I do think that in your case, Virgo, it's quite immediate. And that is because Mercury is on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. Mars is making a semi-square to Uranus. Mercury is making a semi-square to Mars, and that might be that in the end you can start to own the power of this energy. And so perhaps you can actually use this energy as a way to get what you want. And I think that you can be quite effective, and you're certainly not someone who is easy to ignore at the moment. Libra, today is quite hectic for everyone, and the question is, where do you fit in with it all? And it's possible, Libra, that you may not be entirely connected here, and I mean that in a good sense. Other people have their dramas, and it might not always be about you. Though you have to remember that this is a reading which is about just your sign. I don't know anything about your horoscope. Obviously, I can't do an infinite amount of readings. Now, the reason I'm saying that is because one Libra who is probably getting an enormous amount of attention at the moment is Benjamin Netanyahu. And so Benjamin Netanyahu is a Libra, and he's right in the thick of things. And so what I say to Librans in general might not apply to Benjamin Netanyahu. And Benjamin Netanyahu, for example, has got his Mars at 26 Leo, and of course you've got this Mars and Uranus hitting his natal Mars, and of course that has really stirred things up. So I'm just telling you that just to remind you that this 12-sign astrology is quite general, and Benjamin Netanyahu aside, and maybe a few other Librans who are in the thick of things, Putin is a Libra, for example, but ordinary Librans who are not world leaders, it may be a day when you are not necessarily connected with the drama unfolding, and this might give you a degree of objectivity, and you can just do things in your own way and not have to worry too much. And it might feel that other people are the ones who are bearing all the tension, and it could then be that you feel any pressure just coming from other people trying to dump things onto you. And just because someone wants to dump something onto you doesn't mean you have to accept it. And it just may be a time for you just being self-contained and doing what you enjoy. And there are certainly things that you enjoy doing. The moon, moving through an air sign for much of the day. That air sign being Aquarius, and the moon is making a trine to the sun, and really try to make the most of that trine between the moon and the sun. And it's a very fortunate aspect, moon trine sun. You've got the moon and the sun and the moon in air signs, and of course Libra is an air sign, so you could say that the moon and the sun are trine your sign. So do really make the most of that aspect, and it is about you feeling comfortable, and things are moving, and you don't have to worry too much about whatever else is going on in the world, and you do what's important, and get a perspective. And I think at the moment you really can get a perspective. Now, it would possibly help if you were as independent as possible. You don't want to have people cluttering up your life, even if they're people you really care about. Remember, Mars is making a square to Uranus, and in the Libran chart, Mars, often has a connection with relationships, and so Mars square Uranus may represent a person who is hasty. They want attention. They maybe even demand attention, and they could be difficult to predict. So these kind of people, you don't want to have them around. And it's possible that even people who are normally quite reasonable are quite unreasonable because of this Mars square Uranus, and it's the things they say might be confusing, undermining, and again, you don't really want to have to deal with it. And so Libra, just look after yourself and do what you want to do, and feel comfortable doing what you want to do, and don't feel guilty about it, and watch the world from afar, because it's not your problem. At the moment, it's not your problem. Okay, you can have compassion, you can be concerned, but you shouldn't be eaten up by compassion and concern. And if you take that kind of approach, which might be rather hands-off, but I think it's a right approach for you at the moment. Scorpio, you are maybe in the thick of things. Mars is your ruler, and Mars is getting a lot of attention at the moment. I mean, Mars is making a square to Uranus, and Mars is conjunct Regulus, the fixed star. And there's also a semi-square between Mercury and Mars. So, it's all happening. And if you want to be part of it all, well, you can be. And, now might be a time where you really have to see things through. So, it's not a day when you should, do nothing. I think it's a day when you need to project your personality as much as possible, and just be ready to take advantage of any opportunity. And I say that because Mars is conjunct Regulus. I mean, we also have Mars square Uranus, and you could say that Mars square Uranus is a difficult influence, but Mars conjunct Regulus, that's great. Regulus is about power, it's about kingship or queenship, it's a very regal star, and it can be associated with success. And so if you feel that there is an opportunity to be successful, or you can see an opportunity, do take advantage of it. Don't just hang around doing nothing. Don't think about it too much. Sometimes decisive action is required, because Mars is about to change sign, and Mars moving into Virgo is going to represent the end of something. Mars has been in Leo for a long time, on and off, since the beginning of November. And while Mars has been in Leo, you really had a chance to project yourself, in a big way. Okay, it wasn't always easy. I mean, Mars is a planet that's often connected with conflict, and there could have been disagreements and power struggles, but there was always the possibility of benefit for you. And, particularly right at the end of Leo, as Mars makes this conjunction to Regulus. Okay, when Mars moves into Virgo, it will still be conjunct Regulus, but I think that the power of that conjunction, just won't be as strong, tomorrow as it is today. And especially because Mars is in Leo. Leo is a fixed sign. It's a high profile sign in the Scorpio chart. And so I don't know what your plans are today, but really try to make the most of it. But do get the balance right. I mean, Mars is making a square to Uranus. So with Mars making a square to Uranus, there is a possibility that you do something unwise. It can be an accident-prone aspect, so you could get involved in something or do something and you hadn't properly thought it through, and you trip up, I mean, you could literally trip up. Do watch where you go. This is not a time for taking physical risks or any other kind of risk, but you can be active and you can be dynamic without taking risks. So that actually is possible. So overall, Scorpio, it is a high-profile day. It's not necessarily an easy day because there's so much drama going on. And being a Scorpio, you should have some awareness of what this drama is all about and how best to deal with it. You know deep down that nothing is simple, that everything has to be worked through, and use your strengths. And of course, being a Scorpio, your strengths are your feelings and your ability to foresee what is going to happen next. And so your warning systems are going to be finely tuned, and maybe that's going to help you be successful because you can navigate the land in front of you. But if there is something bad in front of you, you can make a diversion. But in the end, you'll get there. So do make the most of things. It really is important. And now, as the day comes to an end, the moon does change sign, and the moon moves from Aquarius into Pisces. And of course, moon moving into Pisces, that's a water sign, and it makes a trine to Jupiter, which is in Cancer, which is in a water sign. So this moon trine Jupiter at the end of the day, okay, it could be into tomorrow if you're in Asia or Australia or New Zealand, but that moon trine Jupiter is going to make things a lot easier, and a lot of the struggle and the drama will probably subside once the moon moves out of Aquarius into Pisces, and you're going to feel better able to deal with things. And you may then realize that there has been an over dramatization, that you've perhaps taken things too seriously, and that once the moon moves into Pisces, I think that things will be, or will feel, a lot easier. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, I notice that true black moon Lilith has moved into Sagittarius. I mean, it has been in Scorpio for a long time, and I do try to keep track of it. And so with true black moon Lilith in Sagittarius, in your sign, that may represent something new and maybe rather interesting. And it might say something about how you come across. With true black moon Lilith in Sagittarius, it might seem that you have got sort of an extra depth to your personality. Normally you think about Sagittarius as being sort of a happy-go-lucky sign, likes to be open and honest, but with true black moon Lilith in Sagittarius, maybe there's something you want to hide, but people are aware that you're hiding something, and that might actually make you more interesting. And also with true black moon Lilith in Sagittarius, you're able to look at things in a new and rather interesting way, and you're not afraid of things which might be of the night. That's how one might see true black moon Lilith, although that could say something about impressions. There is this phrase "of the night," which was, I think it was used by a British politician to describe another politician. Certain politicians are of the night. So what does that mean? Are you of the night? And again, that is suggestive that you could be hiding something. You've got something about you that is interesting, but maybe rather frightening. I mean, it's not a concern to you, but it just shows the complexity of your personality and what you are emanating. And I think this is entirely good. It just makes you a more complex and more interesting person. Now, aside from that, there is a lot going on astrologically, and these astrological events, which I've been going on and on about, don't necessarily have a direct impact on you. You can just see other people spinning their wheels, other people doing stuff, and it's not always desirable. And it's just a reminder that you're living in a complicated world. It's a very complicated world, and additionally, from a heliocentric view, Mars is square Jupiter, and so that Mars square Jupiter, Jupiter is of course your ruler, and you might experience Mars square Jupiter as an imposition. Perhaps other people or the world at large trying to impose its drama onto you and get a reaction out of you. But do you want to react? Do you need to react? And I think the answer might well be no. And I think that becomes clearer as the day progresses. As the day progresses, you actually realize that what you're really looking for is some calm. And when the moon moves into Pisces, as it will, quite when the moon moves into Pisces depends on where you are. In London, it's at 9 minutes past 7 in the evening. So that means in California it would be late morning. In Australia it would be tomorrow. But when the moon moves into Pisces, it does make a trine to Jupiter, and with that moon trine Jupiter, at the end of the day, or perhaps into tomorrow. Of course, if you're in California, it would be around lunchtime. But when that aspect comes, it's just going to make things just feel easier. You'll enjoy the moon moving into Pisces, and the moon doesn't just make the trine to Jupiter; it starts making a trine to Mercury, and so there will be a feeling that you can actually start to calm down. That you don't have to allow other people's drama to undermine you. Should it undermine you? Absolutely not. And also with moon trine Jupiter, you can get some powerful insights about the things that are important. And some things are important, but other things, people make them important, but really, do you have to bother with them? Probably not. And talking about other people, don't take other people too seriously. Other people certainly have a lot to say, and they may do crazy stuff, and they may be demanding your attention, but if you want, you can just ignore them. In the end, they will go away, at least for the moment, and when they come back, they may be feeling sort of more settled, and they may not be quite so disruptive. Capricorn, well, we've just had a square aspect between Jupiter and Saturn. So over the weekend, Jupiter and Saturn were exactly square. And this square between Jupiter and Saturn is still very much in operation. It's still very, very close. And so the Jupiter-Saturn might mean that you have a wariness of certain other people. You know that other people matter, but do you want them to matter? And it is going to be quite important that you give people a chance, that you don't jump to conclusions about what another person is like, and you might assume that that they're going to behave in the way they have done in the past, but they might surprise you. And the reason I'm saying this is because Jupiter is in Cancer. Jupiter is in your opposite sign in Cancer, but it's exalted in Cancer. So someone might be very good for you, but you don't recognize it. You might just refuse to see the good in another person. And so I'm not suggesting that you are overly trusting, but it might just be a time to give people a chance, because you never know what you might find, you never know what you might discover. And additionally, Capricorn, if you want, you really know how to put up the barricades. You can do this with great ease. You put up the barricades. You make it clear that you don't want anyone treading on you, moving into your territory, disturbing you, distracting you. If you want, yeah, you can do all of that. And the advantage of this might be, Capricorn, is that you're looking at what's happening in the world, and it's complicated, and people are under people are under a lot of pressure. They're stressed out, they're nervous, they're not easy to be with, and so why should you bother? Why should you make your life more complicated than it need be, when you can just relax behind the barricades, and you will know how to look after yourself? And that is an approach. That absolutely is an approach. Though, by the end of the day, I do think that you should be, feeling better, and you should have a more positive attitude. And that's because the moon is changing sign. The moon moves out of Aquarius and it moves into Pisces, and the moon makes a trine to Jupiter. And, with that moon trine Jupiter, that perhaps is when lines of communication start to open, and you can get on with people better, and you can start to see the good in people. And at the beginning of the day, that might have been difficult. You might have regarded everyone as a problem, but by the end of the day and into tomorrow, you'll start to see that this is not necessarily the case, and that there really is something to be said for giving people a chance and just trying to see what they've got to offer. And this is an important note for the future. Remember, Jupiter's gone into Cancer, into your opposite sign, and it's going to stay in Cancer for over a year. And so over the next year, it is a time when you need to be understanding other people, seeing the benefits they can have in your life, and realizing you don't have to do everything on your own. And maybe with the moon making a trine to Jupiter, this is the beginning of this process. So perhaps you need to realize that things have changed, and that things really are changing for the better. Aquarius, there is still a lot going on. Moon moving through your sign, and the moon is making some quite dramatic aspects. It is making a square to Uranus, and it is making an opposition to Mars. So what we have here is a T-square, moon opposition Mars, with Uranus on the T, and inevitably that is likely to have an impact on you. And so you have to consider, what is happening, how other people are behaving, and things might unfold which you just weren't expecting. And these things might not in themselves be especially significant, but what matters is how you interpret them. And in fact, interpretation can be everything. If you look at things from a cognitive perspective, you have a neutral input, and we can treat that as being absolutely wonderful, amazing, and life-affirming, but we could also regard that as being completely the end of the world. And so cognition matters. So do think about your interpretations, Aquarius. Your interpretations may not always be helpful, and you should avoid over-dramatizing things. And what matters is that you are in control. You are in control, and for most of the day, okay, it depends on your time zone. The moon, is moving through your sign, so you do understand what is happening. And if things happen which you really weren't expecting, maybe you should think back and try to see the pattern. And you might then realize that what on the surface seems to be unexpected is actually very familiar. You've seen it before. You've probably seen it before on numerous occasions. And so if you remember that, then you won't feel quite so disorientated. And, do think about what it means to be secure and to be comfortable. The moon is making a square to Uranus. What could appear to undermine your security? But in many cases, the thing that appears to undermine your security is actually a reminder of what you need to do to make yourself feel even more comfortable and grounded. And this might be the lesson of Uranus moving through Taurus. So Uranus has been moving through Taurus for quite a few years, and Taurus is of course a fixed sign. Aquarius is a fixed sign. Taurus represents in your chart, the roots of everything. And so now that the Uranus is getting ready to move out of Taurus now Uranus is getting ready to move into Gemini, because July the 7th, I think it's when Uranus moves out of Taurus into Gemini. That is a time, hopefully, when everything is sort of resolved and you actually understand what security really means. And today's aspect, Moon square Uranus, and of course we've had Mars square Uranus over the weekend, is just a reminder, and a reminder of just what you need to do to make yourself feel really comfortable. And I think that is something you can do. And also, Aquarius, you are in control. You have a lot of power. You might not think you have power, but you do. And you can still, very much feel the Jupiter-Saturn square that took place, over the weekend. It's still pretty much exact, and that Jupiter-Saturn square is just encouraging you to really extend your power and to maybe sort of ground your power as well, because power and control are not just random things. They have to be worked through. And you have to create a structure for you to have the type of control you're looking for. You have to create the right structure, and at the moment you really can do it. And perhaps with the Jupiter square Saturn is providing a challenge there, and it's a fortunate challenge, and it should allow you to just feel just better, about yourself. Now, so far I've been, I won't say negative, but I haven't necessarily been entirely positive. But we do have to look at what the real positives are about today. And you might say that the most positive aspect going on today, as far as the average Aquarian is concerned, is a trine between the moon and the sun. The moon is in Aquarius. It's making a trine to the sun, and that does allow you to sort of cut through the various complexities and really be yourself. And if you are able to be yourself, moon in Aquarius, be yourself, trine the sun, and the sun represents all the people you have to relate to, whether you know them well, whether they're strangers. All of those people are represented by the sun. So when the moon makes a trine to sun, that actually allows you to cut through all the chaos and to be someone who is reasonable and fun and is entertaining. And if you really allow yourself to focus on the moon trine sun, or on the harmony of that moon trine sun, then I think that could allow you to really enjoy the day and not to be put off by the various dramas, which in many cases may not be your problem. It may just be someone else over-dramatizing, or it could be you over-dramatizing. Remembering what I was talking about, cognition matters. How you see something matters. So it's not that there are good and bad events. It's that you can make them good or bad, depending on how you choose to interpret them. Pisces the moon is moving through late Aquarius, getting ready to move into your sign. And in fact, if you're in California, late morning, the moon moves into Pisces, your sign. If you're in the UK, it'll be early evening. Same for Europe. It will be a bit later, 8 in Rome or Paris. 9 minutes past 8 in the evening. Yeah, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, well, it won't be until tomorrow that the moon moves into Pisces. But the moon moving into Pisces is a good thing. It has to be a good thing, because when the moon moves into Pisces, it makes a trine to Jupiter. It makes a trine to your ruler. And so Jupiter has only just gone into Cancer. So this will be the first trine between moon in Pisces and Jupiter in Cancer for well over a decade. And that's a reminder of how things have changed. And so when this trine happens, as when the moon moves into Pisces, you may start to see the beneficial changes in yourself, that things really are moving forward, and you have the opportunity to actually be very positive, and also just you'll have a great feeling about what you can do. And I do understand that for many people it is going to be a difficult day, and with Mercury making semisquares to Mars and Uranus, but they don't have to impact you directly. You can be above it all and not feel that you have to get dragged into other people's traumas and dramas, and people are going to be upset about things which may not actually be relevant. One can be upset about what's happening in the world, but is it necessary to take things too far if there is nothing we can do? We do have to consider the here and now, and where we are and what we can do and what our power is. And so you can break free from all of that with this moon trine Jupiter. I mean, it may not always be easy, and some people just won't shut up. I mean, Mercury is making a semi-square to Mars. Mercury can represent another person who's got loads of stuff to say, and they're angry about things, and they want you to be angry about it as well. They might be angry if you're not angry, if you don't share their anger. And so that could be the way this Mercury semi-square Mars works. And of course, Mercury is semi-square Uranus as well, but it may not be your problem. It just may be that you're dealing or could deal with other people who are demanding attention, but you don't have to give them attention. And you have to decide, what the situation calls for. And, even if you know someone well, even if you spend all your time with someone, that someone just could be under a lot of pressure, and they could be quite tense, and you just don't want that tension to rub off on you, because in the end it should be a positive and relaxing day with the moon making that trine to Jupiter. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and now it's time to look at things from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 23, which is splitting apart. And you could say that this is quite appropriate given what is happening in the world. I mean, things are splitting apart, aren't they? I mean, you can see it everywhere. Whether it's in the United States, with sort of riots on the streets. Okay, how long will those riots last for? Are we in for a long and hot summer of riots? But we see the same thing in Europe. There's nothing special about what's going on in the US, and of course we've got We've got wars, we've got Iran, we've got Iraq, not Iraq, we've got Iran, we've got Israel, we've got Ukraine. And so splitting apart, that just may be how it feels. It's like that famous poem, The Second Coming, by W.B. Yeats. How does it go? Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the centre cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. So this poem might sum up what today is all about, with splitting apart. But, we shouldn't take it too personally. This hexagram is just about one day, and just some of us might feel that things aren't getting any better, that there is disintegration in the air. And, we do have two moving lines. The fourth line moves and the sixth line moves. And, with the fourth line moving, this tells us that the decay and the destruction is really continuing. It's just eating through the piece of furniture. It's getting closer to where we sit, and so we may be under threat. At least that's how we might perceive it. And then the sixth line moves. Now the sixth line in this hexagram, which is really a very negative hexagram, but the sixth line is actually quite positive. The sixth line is about the new. It talks about fruit falling off the tree, but when the fruit falls off the tree, it's able to seed, and so the new seeds of the future start to develop. And with the top line moving, the powers of evil have maybe gone as far as they can. They've burnt themselves out. So it could be that things aren't going to get any worse. And again, don't take this too personally. This is a reading for just one day, and it just may be something you're involved in is not working out, or it may be about your perceptions of the world. I mean, that is possible. So because we've got two lines moving, splitting apart does transition into another hexagram, and that hexagram is hexagram number 16, which is contentment. Now, the Wilhelm translation of the I Ching calls this enthusiasm. And enthusiasm, sounds good. We're enthusiastic. It's always good to be enthusiastic. But contentment does give an impression of complacency. We're just rather too relaxed. And Greg Winkup, in his translation, he calls hexagram 16 contentment. And we're content even though we know that things are not getting better. We can see problems on the horizon, but we decide to do nothing about it. The point is, we are fine as we are. As an extreme example, it's like, being on the Titanic, and you're traveling first class, and you have this opulent cabin, and the Titanic has been sunk, but the Titanic has hit an iceberg, but still, that opulent cabin is a lot better than the North Atlantic. So surely, from the perspective of one's short-term comfort, it's just better to stay in one's cabin, isn't it? Rather than to, go out into the cold and the Atlantic, and you don't want to do that. And so contentment could be about that. Okay, it's fine now. So let's not worry too much about the future. Let's just be content in the moment. But that obviously is not the right strategy. And the I Ching is telling us that we need to actually look at what is happening. And this may not be about anything we are doing wrong. It could be the way the world is moving. And of course, if the world is moving in a particular direction, in the end, all of us are going to be impacted. So it's not a time to be complacent, even though there is a strong temptation to be complacent with this hexagram. But things aren't getting any better. And again, I must emphasize, this probably isn't personal. It's just about the way things are going, and it is a difficult day astrologically, and I do think that the I Ching reflects this, and I think also the I Ching is reflecting what is going on in the world. So now I want to go back to the astrology and look at Mars and Uranus and Mercury. So let's just go back to the chart for today. And so I said that today there is still a square between Mars and Uranus. Mars is at 29:37 Leo and Uranus is at 28:59 Taurus. Now, there is a temptation to think that because that this Mars-Uranus square is separating, that somehow the worst is over. But the thing is, we have to look at Mercury, and when one is trying to work out what transits mean, it's often a good idea to look for a triggering planet, a faster moving planet that triggers things. And so I would actually argue that this Mars-Uranus square, the influence of this Mars-Uranus square, theoretically is going to be stronger today, Monday, than it was over the weekend. And that's because of Mercury. Because, Mercury is on the Mars-Uranus square, and it's an exact midpoint aspect. And additionally, Mercury is making a semi-square to Mars, and Mercury is making a semi-square to Uranus. And because of those two aspects, it makes it sort of extra powerful. So how do we read this? Well, you look at all the violence that's been happening over the weekend, and it does seem that it could very well spill into Monday. And there could be, particular events that we need to be concerned about. Now, as far as what Mercury on the Mars-Uranus midpoint might mean, let's look at Reinhold Ebertin. So Reinhold Ebertin, combination of stellar influences, looking at Mercury on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, just get a flavour of this midpoint aspect. Because the general principle of Mars-Uranus, well, he says it's a sudden application of effort and intervention in the body. I'm not quite sure if it's quite as straightforward as that. And a negative manifestation of Mars-Uranus is an argumentative disposition, a lack of balance, intolerance, the urge for freedom, strong emotional tension, strains and stresses, a person imbued with a fighting spirit, and of course violence. And with Mercury on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, the inclination to act independently, the inclination to draw heavily on one's nervous energy reserves, a test of strength or power carried through calculatingly. You could see these attacks in Iran and Israel. There's a lot of calculating power there. But Mercury is also the messenger. And it's also about understanding, and it's about understanding the real nature of these acts of violence, these acts of war, and what the actual sort of underlying message is. Now, this is made more complicated because we get an even faster moving trigger here because of the moon, because the moon is triggering it as well, because we have a T-square here. So moon is opposition Mars, moon is opposition Uranus, and of course moon is making a sesquiquadrate to Mercury. So we have got Mars, Uranus, Mercury, moon, all coming together here today on Monday, which is another reason why I think that Monday could actually be more intense than the actual, than the weekend when we got that Israeli attack on Iran. So, what kind of things happen when Mercury is on the Mars-Uranus midpoint? So I thought that I would just look at some things that did happen historically. So, for example, last year we had a big fire in Denmark. I don't know if you remember that. It was the Borsen fire. It was this building. Did it contain the old sort of stock market? Was it in Copenhagen, and it was a building that was of historic importance in Denmark, and it caught fire. I don't know quite how bad the fire was. I think it was pretty bad. There was a lot of damage caused, and you had this when Mercury was conjunct the Mars-Uranus midpoint. You can see that Mars and Uranus were in sextile anyway, but it wasn't an exact sextile, but it was Mercury that brought those two planets together. So that's certainly a manifestation of Mercury on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. Just accidents, things catching fire. That's a way of looking at it. Now, Mars-Uranus can be about assassinations, can be about gunshots, and in 1942, Heydrich was assassinated. Now, Reinhard Heydrich was one of the worst Nazis, and he was in charge in Germany and in the Czech lands, and he was assassinated in Prague. And this is a chart of his assassination. It was not the chart of his death; it was a chart of when he was attacked. He died a few days later, and so there's Mars, there's Uranus, and so Mars and Uranus are about 39 degrees apart, and Mercury was exactly on the midpoint. So Mercury conjunct the Mars-Uranus midpoint. You could see that as an attack, an act of violence, and in this case, it was an assassination. And talking about politicians dying and Iran dying, you remember that helicopter crash when the Iranian president was killed. And so this is a chart for that crash, and this had Mercury on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. So there we had Mercury was about 19 degrees from Uranus, and it was 19 degrees from Mars. So yeah, Mercury conjunct the Mars-Uranus midpoint. By the way, it says that it's set for Tehran. It wasn't. The crash happened elsewhere, but I did change the coordinates. I did get the coordinates right. So this is a chart for this helicopter accident which killed the Iranian president. And so it can be about a surprise tragedy, a surprise accident. So that might be something that we need to be thinking about with this aspect. And over the weekend, there have been sort of riots in Los Angeles with this No King's Day, and in the UK last year there was an event which led to riots, and that was the Southport stabbing. So Southport stabbing was someone who had originally it's happened in the UK. Someone who had originally come from Africa, had been sort of radicalized, I think, through some sort of Islamic propaganda, and there was a group of girls. They were having, I don't know, some kind of Taylor Swift event, and he just walked in and started stabbing, and some of them were killed. And this happened with Mercury on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. So there's Mars, there's Uranus, and so Mercury was square the Mars-Uranus midpoint. So this was an event, a killing, which, because it's Mercury, everyone found out about it, and it led to riots. There were prolonged riots as a result of this, and the police were not very clear at the beginning. They felt, people felt that information was being kept from the public, and this really made things a lot worse. So that is a way in which Mercury aspecting the Mars-Uranus midpoint can work. And when Mercury is on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, that might encourage you to think about violence and to think about attacks and attacking things. So the Kursk offensive. So August 6, 2024 is when the Ukrainians attacked the Russian region of Terz. This was Russian before the on the old borders, and they attacked Kursk, and they did this when I think Mercury was square. Mercury was square the Mars-Uranus midpoint. So there's Mercury. It actually happened around the time of the Southport stabbings, I think. It wasn't not too far away from that. But there's Mercury on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, and so thoughts about violence, thoughts about attacks, and so that encouraged Ukraine to go into the Kursk region. I mean, as it happened, the attack was, I mean, it captured some Russian stuff, but its main objective was probably capturing the Kursk nuclear power station. That didn't work, so it was a very, very expensive failure, which actually some say, but it's led to up to over 70,000 Ukrainian deaths. I mean, I don't know whether that's true, but that's certainly a pro-Russian account. So that's something that can happen with Mercury on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. And when you're dealing with Mercury on the Mercury aspecting the Mars-Uranus midpoint, you're thinking about hard aspects. So you're thinking about conjunctions, conjunctions, oppositions, squares. This is an example of a square, but also semisquares and sesquiquadrates. And this is the chart for the beginning of the Armenian genocide. So the Armenian genocide was, there was a decision taken to start rounding up Armenians in 1915, and this is probably probably the moment it started to happen. I don't know how exact this time is, but there's Mercury at 25 degrees Aries, and there's Mars. So Mercury was exactly semi-square the Mars-Uranus midpoint, and so this was a decision. Someone made the decision that let's start the arrests, and so that can be a way in which this aspect can work. And likewise, one iconic thing that happened when Mercury was making a semi-square, or I think it was a semi-square or a sesquiquadrate to the Mars-Uranus midpoint, was the fall of Saigon. I mean, this when the helicopters coming off the American embassy in Saigon as the North Vietnamese closed in, and this took place with Mercury making a hard aspect to the Mars-Uranus midpoint. So so far we've been looking at fairly negative events, but it can be a good time, Mercury on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, to start things. So, for example, Joe Rogan's podcast, the Joe Rogan Experience, started on December the 24th, 2009, when Mercury was sesquiquadrate the Mars-Uranus midpoint. So Mercury represents communication, and so if it's on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, it depends on the type of communication, but that probably fits the kind of image that Joe Rogan is trying to present, with his podcast, and perhaps having Mercury on the Mars-Uranus midpoint for his type of podcast. I'm afraid I've never listened to it, but I know it's very important. That may have worked well. And finally, another event that took place with Mercury on the Mars-Uranus midpoint was the canonization of Archbishop Ramiro. Remember, Ramiro was the Archbishop of San Salvador, who was assassinated by right-wing death squads while saying mass, and then he was canonized a long time afterwards, nearly 40 years after he was murdered. And at the time of his canonization, there was Mercury, and Mercury was making, I think in this case it was another sesquiquadrate to the Mars-Uranus midpoint. So Mercury is about communication, people seeing his canonization. And of course, this canonization happened because of an act of violence. So this gives you an idea about what one might expect with Mercury on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. You can see accidents like the fire in Copenhagen, assassinations, helicopter crashes, and people responding. Because Mercury is not just about the accident itself; it's about the response. Of course, in the Southport stabbing, it was a murder; it wasn't an accident, but you saw the response to an act of violence, Mars-Uranus. So I do think that this midpoint is important. I do think one should look at midpoints in general, and I think that Monday, well, it certainly should be interesting. We'll see what happens. But today, Monday, yeah, it could be hectic. And I think that the Mars-Uranus aspect is going to be at maximum power on Monday, June the 16th. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you did enjoy this video, I would be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.